Part 31. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 301. Wrong. You never expected that this young man would be so stubborn. His expression suddenly turned cold, and he was given 50 lashes without any mercy. The scarred young man stayed in the military camp to recover from his injuries. His 18 guards were responsible for taking care of him. Of course, they also tried to persuade the young master to leave here, but the young man seemed determined to stay. The 18 guards had no choice but to accompany. In addition to treating his injuries, Rong Yu only ordered the guards to bring him meals every day. He had 3 meals a day just like ordinary soldiers, and he did not receive any preferential treatment. There was no reason to treat him preferentially. I ignored the others. Rong Yu didn't visit him during the days when he was recovering from his injuries, and he didn't even ask. He was very busy with his affairs. He had to train soldiers, handle border affairs, and also be busy with some unknown things. He had no time or interest to pay attention to it. A young man whom I have never met. However, during the time Xian Yu and Yao stayed in the military camp, in addition to someone secretly watching their every move, Rong Yu also sent someone to check the young man's identity. In the heart of the military camp, the possibility of enemy spies infiltrating was not non-existent. Rong Yu would not ignore the hidden dangers just because of this boy's impulsive, straightforward temper and young age. Even when he first saw this young man, he subconsciously assumed that he would be a spy. But intuition is intuition, and what he needs is facts and evidence. But investigations also take time. A whip injury is different from a cane injury. The injury recovers very quickly, but within a few days it is almost healed, at least it does not affect movement. The young man found Rong Yu again, his brows and eyes still so domineering. Masters in the world only compete in martial arts. As the commander-in-chief of an army, and now a world-famous young general, you should be good at not only martial arts, but also riding, archery, sword formations, and the art of war strategy. These are the projects I want to challenge you with. Seeing that he didn't give up, Rong Yu didn't talk nonsense with him. He just said, "What do you want to compare?" "Compare everything that can be compared. You can compete, but you can decide the rules." Rong Yu nodded coldly. "I will decide the punishment." The young man sneered, "No problem, isn't it just a whipping? It's not like I haven't been whipped since I was a child. If you lose once, get 10 more lashes." The young man's expression was stiff, but he quickly agreed, just added, "What if I win?" "You can't win." The young man was furious, his pride was shattered by these words, his blood boiled, and he almost wanted to shoot Rong Yu to death on the spot. Of course, he soon learned that the young general who became famous in one battle was not in vain, nor did he defeat the northern Xinjiang cavalry because of good luck. No matter how dissatisfied he is, there are some facts that he cannot deny. During that whole day, he challenged Rong Yu on 2 projects. There was a spear duel immediately. After only a few dozen rounds, he was shot in the back by Rong Yu. The strong force directly knocked him off his horse, and he lost embarrassingly. The young man was not convinced and challenged the archer. When shooting from a distance, Rong Yu could pierce a yang with 100 steps, and he could hit the bullseye with 3 arrows. In comparison, although Xian Yu and Yao's archery skills were pretty good, at least better than most of the soldiers in the military camp, he could not do it in front of Rong Yu. Like a 3-year-old child. This huge gap made Xian Yu and Yao's face feel hot, and he couldn't help but wonder if the people who praised him before were deliberately trying to make him happy. Continue to be dissatisfied and continue to challenge. Rong Yu reminded him coldly, "You already owe 120 lashes, are you sure you want to continue the competition?" 120? Xian Yu and Yao was shocked, "Why 120? Shouldn't it be 70? Last time it was 50, this time it's doubled." Rong Yu said indifferently, "You have lost 2 games in a row, so add 20. 50 is doubled to 100, and 20 is added after 2 losses. So 120. This number was like a basin of cold water, instantly extinguishing his anger and the urge to continue challenging. Xian Yuanyao looked coldly at the young man in front of him, who was obviously not much older than him, but was as invincible as a mountain. He almost gritting his teeth, "Who do you study under?" The young man in black military uniform had a stern expression and ignored the question, his noble and delicate eyebrows filled with frost. Xian Yuanyao didn't seem to care whether he could get the answer or not. He just said, "I have practiced martial arts and archery diligently since I was a child, and studied military formations. I have never been slacking off, and I have never reached your level. You have dull qualifications." "Bullshit," Xian Yuanyao was furious. "The sentence I have heard most since I was a child is that I have good qualifications and great talent, and I am a natural general. You are the first person to say that my qualifications are dull." His lifelong ambition is to be a powerful general, and to be a famous general all over the world. He also has the ambition to become famous all over the world in one battle. He hopes that one day the name Xian Yuanyao will spread all over the world, and everyone will hear his name. The names are all in awe. But his ambition has not yet been realized, but there are people who have become famous before him. A young general emerged from the great Zhou dynasty. Just by his name, he took away all the glory and attracted the attention of everyone in the world. Defeating the northern Xinjiang cavalry, what kind of scenery is this? Xian Yuanyao couldn't control his anger and led the 18 guards to ride forward. He just wanted to know why someone became famous before him. He practiced hard day and night, mastering martial arts and archery, military strategies and troop formations. Why was there someone who could gain glory and fame before him? Is it because the great Zhou dynasty was conquered by northern Xinjiang, but Dongling has no war all year round? He refused. But after coming here and meeting the young general, he realized that his refusal to obey was just a manifestation of his own self-deception. However, even after seeing Rong Yu's martial arts skills and his shocking archery and horse riding, he still couldn't imagine whether this young general, who was not much older than him, had not eaten or drunk since birth, and practiced martial arts and archery day and night, so he was so strong. Even if he was extremely talented, he shouldn't be so strong. Could it be that he worshipped an omnipotent master? Xian Yuanyao was really puzzled when he was angry, but Rong Yu didn't pay attention to his thoughts and questions. In view of his disrespect today, the word young master and the word bullshit angered Rong Yu, and the whip was particularly heavy that day. Before the 120 whips were finished, Xian Yuanyao fainted. However, Rong Yu was as hard as iron. He did not allow the 18 guards to take their precious young master back until the number of whips was completed, and coldly ordered, "Take him away from here." But the boy who fainted from the pain opened his eyes abruptly, his face pale, and his voice hoarse. "It's not, the competition is not over yet, I won't leave." Then he fainted again. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 302. This time, he took a full half-month to recover from the injury. Rong Yu still didn't visit him, but in the past half-month, he already knew his identity, the Prince of Weinan in Dongling, Xian Yuanyao. He was not a spy from the northern border, nor was he an eyeliner sent by the court to be planted in the army. He was just a rebellious young man who came from 1,000 miles away. After listening to the report of his spies, Rong Yu was silent for a long time, and only said coldly, "Don't make it public for now." Then he was as cold and distant as before, and as strict and cold as before when training soldiers. After Xian Yuanyao woke up, he didn't rush to challenge Rong Yu, but took advantage of the free time when he was injured and weak to try to understand Rong Yu indirectly. When he learned that he was the prince of the Great Zhou, he was stunned. The prince of the Great Zhou? Why does a prince who was born in a noble family and should have been pampered since childhood have such a powerful ability? He thought that the other party was just from an ordinary military family, and had been trained in the military camp since he was young, so he was qualified to lead troops to fight and had such powerful skills and archery. He never thought that he would be a prince. Before coming here, he didn't even ask a question. But now that he knew, he deeply understood that it was probably impossible to get more information. The other party was not only a noble prince, but also a powerful general. He was very strict in military discipline. Who dared to talk nonsense in the military camp? The 18 guards around him could go and check, but they knew the character of their young master. When he arrived at the Great Zhou military camp, he was whipped twice in a row but failed to stop his suicidal behavior. How could the 18 guards dare to leave his side? So the plan to investigate Rong Yu had to be shelved for the time being. However, Xian Yuanyao was extremely stubborn and would not give up until he achieved his goal. He would ask the person who was responsible for delivering meals to help pass on the message. After his injury healed, he would take the initiative to go to the military camp. Even if someone stopped him, he could still meet Rong Yu in his own way, and then shamelessly follow him to watch him train his soldiers, and witness with his own eyes that those sturdy 7-foot men behaved like grandsons in front of him. This young man was much colder than his father. His training methods were more ruthless and his heart was harder. It seemed that nothing could shake his will. Xian Yuanyao would sometimes feel weak in his legs when watching him train his soldiers. However, the 2 meals of pain made him restrain his arrogance and learn to use his brain to judge the situation. When he realized that the prince of the Great Zhou was really a terrible person, he was destined to be suppressed in terms of momentum. Once the momentum weakened, what else could be said? The original unwillingness to admit defeat had long been thrown out of the sky, but there was still a sense of dissatisfaction in his heart. However, when he challenged Rong Yu for the 3rd time, he actually lost his confidence. The 3rd competition was horseback archery. The vast grassland was endless, and thousands of horses were galloping on the grassland. The feeling of galloping in the wind as if to fly into the sky made people involuntarily feel a sense of righteousness, as if all the suppressed pride was unsealed and returned to its original form. The sky above the grassland was blue and boundless, and several black eagles flew past with sharp screams, leaving proud and unruly footprints in the air. Their competition today was horseback archery. As usual, the rules of the competition were set by Xian Yuanyao, and the punishment was still set by Rong Yu. If you lose today, you will be a slave to this general for the next year. Slave. Xian Yuanyao's face changed instantly when he heard this. What did you say? If you lose, you will be my slave for a year, Rong Yu repeated calmly. If you don't want to, today's competition will end here. Xian Yuanyao might have been frightened by the bet. His expression changed again and again. Anger, hesitation, struggle, and thought flashed across his face. Various emotional fluctuations emerged one by one, and then disappeared one by one, and finally turned into a word of compromise with gritted teeth. Okay. Being a slave is being a slave, what's the big deal? He would love to have a fair opportunity to contact him and understand him. Although his status is a little humble, being a slave means serving tea and water to take care of daily life. He is not a woman, so he doesn't have to be responsible for warming the bed. What's so scary? And no one here knows him. After a year, he will go back to Huainan and still be his noble and unparalleled prince. Thinking of this, he felt at ease. The rules of today's competition are very simple. Whoever can shoot down the first eagle will win. The young man galloped on his horse, drew his bow and shot an arrow, aiming at the black eagle circling in the sky. Whoosh! The arrow flew up into the air with a force, as if it was going straight into the sky, and the cold arrow tip was aimed at a black eagle flying in the sky. However, another arrow shot from the side directly passed by his arrow body, mercilessly shooting down his arrow. Xian Yuanyao could hardly believe it, and was about to turn his head to say something, but then he saw another arrow making a fierce and sharp sound of breaking through the wind, and shot at the sharp eagle that was about to spread its wings and fly away at a speed faster than lightning. A sharp scream. The black eagle fell from the sky with its wings flapping, and the horse galloped. The sound of horse hooves was like thunder, and the injured black eagle fell into Rong Yu's hands in an instant. Xian Yuanyao was so angry that his face turned red. He stared at Rong Yu angrily, his eyes spitting fire. "You cheated. Whoever can shoot down the first eagle will win." Rong Yu looked at him expressionlessly. "Didn't I shoot down this eagle? Why did you shoot my arrow?" Rong Yu lowered his eyes and said indifferently, "Your rules don't say that you can't do that." Xian Yuanyao was speechless. Later, he learned that most of the black hawks flying over the grassland were trust hawks raised by Rong Yu. They could not be killed easily. If Rong Yu had not stopped him, his arrow would have penetrated the body of the black hawk directly. The arrow shot by Rong Yu only grazed the black eagle's wing. The force caused some damage to the eagle's wing. After a few days of medicine, it could spread its wings and fly again. But for him now, none of this is important. What is important is that he lost this competition and must be a slave to Rong Yu for 1 year as agreed. Xian Yuanyao felt desperate about this and felt that he had no hope of life. He originally came with the power to destroy the other party, but he didn't expect that he would be reduced to being a slave of the other party. It was a miscalculation. What happened next? A quiet and soft voice sounded from the carriage. Nan 11 pursed her lips and smiled. "Is he really a slave to you?" Rong Yu nodded. "Yes. It can be seen that he is a person who can afford to lose," Nan 11 said calmly, "otherwise, there would not have been the scene on the school field today." The carriage entered the imperial city and drove slowly through the bustling and noisy streets. Nan 11 frowned and had a vague suspicion in her heart. Did you have the intention to tame him after learning his identity? If Rong Yu had planned to deploy manpower in Dongling early, then Xian Yuanyao, who had thrown himself into the trap, was obviously an excellent candidate. He would guard the Huainan border, and any disturbance would not easily reach the imperial city, making it easier for him to do things. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 303. Rong Yu kissed her face and said in a steady tone, "Although the word tame is a bit inappropriate, it does have this meaning." Nan 11 was curious. "Since I am a slave, how can I train under you? There should be no general who would let his slaves train with the army." "It's a long story." Rong Yu was about to speak when he suddenly heard the sound of horse hooves galloping past outside the carriage, and then Yin Yu's voice came from the front of the carriage. "Master, there is a group of guards." The army left the city, and the one at the front seemed to be a young imperial doctor. There was silence in the carriage. Nan 11 frowned slightly. It seems that the emperor also knew what happened in the military camp and sent the imperial doctor there. Is he worried that the military doctor's medical skills are not good enough? Rong Yu said, "It's just the emperor's attitude. Don't think too much about it." The king of Huainan was also in the palace. A prince who had led the army for many years naturally knew how injured he was after receiving a military stick. He also knew that military doctors were better at dealing with trauma than the imperial doctors in the palace. The imperial doctors and the imperial army went there just to show the emperor's attention and make it easier to understand the situation in the military camp. On the military camp grounds just now, I could see Xian Yuanyao's attitude towards you. Nan 11 smiled lightly. "But did you not know about what happened today?" Rong Yu nodded. Xian Yuanyao made his own decision. "When I arrived at the military camp, I saw what he wanted to do, and then I used it to cooperate with his plan. First, he provoked a conflict between the two armies, making people mistakenly think that Prince Huainan was arrogant and domineering. He used provocative methods to arouse the anger of the Zhou soldiers, forcing you to personally deal with the matter. Nan 11 smiled casually, as a Xianyuanyao must have anticipated how you would handle this matter as a coach with sharp skills and strict management. Rong Yu hummed, probably so. He is a stranger to you, so naturally he can't obey your way of dealing with it, so he pretends to be arrogant and poses the challenge. Nan 11's voice was calm and soft, and she told Xianyuanyao's entire plan unhurriedly, because you know that you are not your opponent. After losing, you can use the excuse of being willing to admit defeat and accept the military law disposal as a matter of course. In this way, you can not only deter the three armies, but also let the Dongling royal family dignitaries and courtiers know that you are his courage, a regent who can even defeat the Prince of Huainan, and will not be soft on other provocative people. Everyone saw his thunderous skills, cold heart, and fearless courage. Even if his goal of helping the regent establish his authority was achieved, in the future, the clan dignitaries in Dongling would like to cause trouble for Rong Yu. Or if you want to crush him, you have to think carefully about whether your bones are strong enough to withstand the punishment of the military stick. It's actually a good deal to get such an effect from a flesh wound. But the problem is, Xianyuanyao is smart and dares to take action. At the same time, his friendship for you is also extraordinary. Otherwise, no matter how well thought out the plan is, he would not be able to exchange his pride and wounds for you to establish his authority opportunity. The prince in charge of the military has a sensitive status. He needs to be careful when acting under the emperor's feet. He is afraid of being too popular. But for Rong Yu, he still did it. Rong Yu was silent for a moment. In fact, what Xianyuanyao did didn't make him feel very happy. He didn't need others to sacrifice their skin and flesh to achieve the so-called best results, but Xianyuanyao did have good intentions, even though it was the good intentions of making one's own decisions. Rong Yu, I understand what you think. Nan 11 looked at him with a soft smile on her face. You don't need them to be loyal in this way, but since Xianyuanyao has caused this incident, we can only cooperate with him. After all, outsiders don't know the truth. They only saw the conflict between the Suanjia army of the Great Zhou dynasty and the Huainan army. This kind of thing is indeed not allowed to happen in the military camp, so a solution must be given. It was impossible for him to say bluntly that Xianyuanyao's troubles and provocations were fake in front of the soldiers of the three armies, and it was even less possible for him to tell others that he and Xianyuanyao were old acquaintances, a prince guarding the border and a regent from another country were friends. Old knowledge is a big taboo in itself. If it reaches the king's ears, what kind of suspicion will it arouse? The civil and military officials of the Manchu dynasty and the royal family members are not fuel-efficient lamps. If someone wants to target King Huainan, they will never give up using this relationship. Once King Huainan and his son are charged with collaborating with the enemy, the consequences will not be just a matter of military law. Solved. Rong Yu looked at her quietly, pursed her thin lips and said, 11er. Rong Yu gently held her in his arms and rested his chin on the top of her head. You are so smart. He was never unfamiliar with such a smart and wise woman, but at this moment, he couldn't help but feel a little uneasy in his heart. He always felt that he was invisible in front of her and could be seen through. There are some things that he hasn't figured out how to tell her yet, but he is afraid that one day she will see through it before he can say it. Isn't it smart? Nan 11 raised her eyebrows. Rong Yu pursed her lips and said softly, of course it's good. My 11er is the smartest girl and will become the most sage and promising empress of Dongling in the future. Your political achievements will be unmatched by anyone else's. The greatness. Nan 11 laughed. Rong Yu, I'm not that powerful, don't praise me too much, be careful of falling. It's okay, Rong Yu said softly, I will catch you in time and won't let you fall. Nan 11's heart softened, she raised her head and kissed his chin. Wrong you, no matter what else you have not had time to tell me, or you are not mentally prepared to let me know, I will tell you, I love you, and nothing and no one in this life can separate us. Then he sighed softly, let the past go by. No one can indulge in memories forever. We should look forward. A great life is in front of us, not in memories. Wrong you was silent for a moment and hummed. I actually don't have much curiosity about the past, but even if I learn some not so good things in the hidden truth in the future, I won't have any grudge against you because of those things that have passed a long time ago. Nan 11 stretched out her hand, caressing his handsome face. You are an invincible king. You are so strong that no one can match you in every aspect. But you are too cautious emotionally and you are so fragile that it makes me feel bad. Wrong you looked down at her and remained silent. Nan 11 stretched out her hand to smooth his eyebrows and said calmly, so in today's incident, Ling Fan was the most innocent, and this beating was actually quite unfair. Wrong you narrowed his eyes, it is indeed a bit unfair, but it is not completely innocent. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 304. Back in the palace, before the two of them had time to return to the East Palace, a chamberlain came and said, the emperor asked Princess Feng and the regent to go to the Dajhan Palace. Nan 11 said calmly, I know. Wrong you didn't say anything. The two went to the Dajhan Palace together. Several princes were still in the main hall. Seeing the couple walking in together, King Wei frowned. I heard that the regent used military law against the Prince of Huainan in the military camp outside the city. From the very beginning, he sounded like he was asking for help. Several other princes remained silent, their eyes falling on the regent's face, wondering how he would respond to this matter. Rong Yu's expression was indifferent, and his noble and delicate eyebrows were always filled with a cold and distant look that could repel people thousands of miles away. He turned a deaf ear to King Wei's question. His attitude was extremely cold, and he obviously didn't want to pay attention to it. That is indeed what happened, Nan 11 said calmly, but the little prince is not seriously ill. He has been examined by a military doctor and given medicine. He will be fine for 2 days. Is it enough to raise her for 2 days? King Wei looked at her in disbelief, as if he was shocked by her understatement. Princess Feng thinks it is right for the regent to attack the Prince of Huainan. Nan 11 said casually, Uncle, don't be so shocked. You don't know the whole story, so don't rush to question it. King Wei's expression changed. Uncle King Huainan. Nan 11 turned to look at a middle-aged man in military uniform with an elegant face in the palace, and bowed slightly. Do you want me to explain the cause and effect of this incident? Princess Feng, please don't do this. King Huainan turned slightly to avoid her courtesy. Yao is reckless and deserves to be taught a lesson. Even if the regent doesn't teach him a lesson, I will definitely not let him off lightly. After finishing speaking, he did not forget to add, thank you Princess Feng for being so tolerant and pardoning half of his punishment. When Nan 11 heard this, the corner of her lips raised a faint arc, and she couldn't help but feel a little fond of the Huainan prince. Perhaps this is the true demeanor of a military commander. He does not lose the cultivated demeanor of a royal prince and nobleman, but at the same time possesses the uprightness and justice of a military commander. No wonder he can teach Xian Yuanyao, a fairly outstanding son, a pampered young master from a powerful family in the imperial capital. In comparison, Xian Yuanyao is indeed outstanding. But this outstanding performance should not be entirely due to King Huainan. Rong Yu also contributed, and Rong Yu's influence on Xian Yuanyao was definitely not small. Otherwise, how could the arrogant prince follow him wholeheartedly? Nan 11 thought to herself that maybe she should get to know Xian Yuanyao better. What exactly is going on? His Majesty the Emperor said in a deep voice. Someone should have reported what happened. Xian Yuanyao led the Huainan army to make trouble. The Zhou army was angered and fought back angrily. which caused a bad impact in the military camp. Nan 11 said in a calm tone, with a tone of voice. With a bit of calmness, he said, although the responsibility for this matter does not lie with the Zhou army, General Ling, one of the generals under Rong Yu's command, was still punished for this. As for Xian Yuanyao, he was willing to accept the punishment. The premise is that Rong Yu can defeat him, so this is not considered coercion, nor is Rong Yu abusing his power, but it is completely a fight and a fight. King Wei said coldly, so the regent of the great Zhou dynasty was right to use military law against the prince of the royal family on the territory of Dongling. Those who commit crimes in the military should be dealt with according to military rules. What does the eldest uncle think is wrong? Nan 11 raised an eyebrow. Xian Yuanyao is the heir apparent of the royal family. So what? Nan 11 said in a calm tone, I have always thought that the higher you stand, the greater the responsibility you should bear. This incident was originally caused by him. Don't you punish him instead of punishing him for obeying orders. Soldiers. King Wei was speechless for a moment and said in a cold tone, in front of all the officers and soldiers of the Huainan army, if you attack their prince, are you not afraid of causing dissatisfaction among the soldiers? The officers and soldiers of the Huainan army are not dissatisfied. On the contrary, they are a group of men with blood and backbone. They all believe that Rong Yu's matter was handled very fairly. Nan 11 smiled lightly, and her unhurried tone sounded calm and composed. I have just said that this matter is one that is willing to fight and one that is willing to suffer. It is based on the premise of fairness and voluntariness, so it will not cause anyone's dissatisfaction. King Wei was speechless for a moment and his expression was extremely embarrassing. If Uncle Huainan King has nothing to ask, then I and Rong Yu will go back to the East Palace first. Nan 11 turned around, there are some cute little girls coming to the East Palace. I will go back and chat with them for a while. When Nan 11 was talking to King Wei, King Huainan's eyes kept falling on the dignified and indifferent Rong Yu. Looking at this young man who was only 2 or 3 years older than Xian Yuanyao, he thought of the young man who stayed in Dazhu Periphery Pass when Yao was a teenager. In those few years, I somewhat understood my son's choice. This man is not very old, but his natural noble demeanor makes people feel awe, like Yu Ziwenting, like a sword sheathed, sharp but restrained. It seems that even if the sky falls, he won't even frown. He is a man with an exceptionally strong and determined will. Xian Yuansheng suppressed his thoughts and said calmly, today Yao was unreasonably provocative. If he has offended the regent, I will apologize to the regent on his behalf. It is because I have failed to teach my son well. I hope the regent will do it. There are a lot of people, don't try to get along with him. Rong Yu glanced at him and said in an indifferent voice, it doesn't matter. King Wei, King Jing, and King Huai all had strange expressions. The three of them looked at King Huainan in disbelief. Their son was beaten, and his father actually apologized to the person who beat his son? They couldn't help wondering whether the king of Huainan really loved his son. He wouldn't have another son. If there's nothing else, Rong Yu and I will go back first. Nan 11 looked at the emperor who was leaning on the brocade couch drinking tea. Grandfather is not in good health. He should stay in bed and rest more. Don't worry about trivial matters. We will handle them properly and won't mess around. The emperor paused. Was he reminding him to mind his own business? Nan 11 didn't have time to care about his thoughts. She took Rong Yu's hand and turned around and walked out. The princes in the Dajhan palace looked at each other. They didn't understand why they were called here. It was just to let Princess Feng defend Rong Yu and then tell them that even if he was a member of the Dongling royal family, Rong Yu could beat him and punish him as he pleased. And their fifth brother, is he afraid of trouble or afraid of causing trouble? His son was beaten. In front of so many soldiers, the prince was beaten by an outsider, and as a father, he didn't even stand up for his son. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 305. Several girls from the Xianyuan family were still strolling around the garden in the East Palace. The maid prepared tea and snacks for them. Aunt Sue and others waited on them, not daring to neglect these girls. Although they came here to see Princess Feng, they are also royal princesses, and their status cannot be neglected. As soon as Nan 11 and Rong Yufu returned to the East Palace, someone notified the three people sitting and drinking tea in the plum garden. Xianyuan Swilling was the first to get up, with a bit of excitement on his pretty face. The regent is back too. Her performance left the other two speechless for a moment. Aunt Sue said respectfully, yes. Xianyuan Swilling immediately stopped drinking tea and eating snacks. He couldn't wait to turn around and walk down the Nuanting Pavilion. However, as soon as he stepped down the stone steps and was blown by the cool breeze, he suddenly realized that his behavior was a bit inappropriate. He paused slightly and felt clear. He cleared his throat and turned to look at Xianyuan Jia and Xianyuan Dan. We should be able to stay in the East Palace for lunch today. I wonder if Princess Feng will agree. Xianyuan Jia frowned slightly. Princess Feng wants us to stay, we can stay, but if you take the initiative to ask, that's not good. Xianyuan Swilling wrinkled her nose. What's wrong? The Crown Prince canonization ceremony hasn't started yet. Besides, I've come a long way, so Princess Feng should treat me well. This is etiquette. Guests coming from afar should indeed be well entertained. Xianyuan Jia did not refute. She is the concubine of Prince Jing's palace. Unlike Xianyuan Dan and Xianyuan Swilling, even if the concubine's words and deeds are a little deviant, they can only be reprimanded. She was able to enter the palace today because Princess Feng invited her to come by name last night. Otherwise, she would not be qualified to enter the palace at will, so she always adheres to the principle of talking less. The more you say, the more mistakes you make. The three of them went to the Fenghua Hall of the East Palace together. After entering the palace, Rong Yu helped Nan 11 take off her cold-proof cloak and handed it to Yin Yu. He held her waist and sat down on the brocade couch in front of the window. The palace servants presented hot tea, and Rong Yu took it and handed it to her. Nan 11's hand, drink some tea to keep warm. Nan 11 looked out the window at the bright sunshine and smiled slightly. Today is a warm day. Rong Yu was silent for a moment, and then his voice softened. Winter has entered. So even if the weather is nice, it can't stop the coldness in the air. Yes, Nan 11 nodded. My husband is right. The corners of Rong Yu's lips curled up, and he was about to circle her when he heard footsteps coming from outside. Sister Princess, Xueling walked in quickly, searching for the people in the palace. When she saw Nan 11 and Rong Yu, her expression lit up, and her eyes lit up like a hungry wolf seeing a sheep. You guys back? Xianyuan Dan and Xianyuan Jia walked in behind her and bowed to Nan 11, Princess Feng, Regent. Come and sit, Nan 11 said with a faint smile. Something happened in the military camp just now. I left the palace to deal with it. I kept you waiting for a long time. Xianyuan Jia and Xianyuan Dan sat down, and the palace servants served tea. They both looked a little restrained, but Xianyuan Swilling locked her almond eyes with Rong Yu, with a shy and timid face. The regent is so good looking, I don't know. How old are you this year? Nan 11 paused while holding the teacup, raised her head, and looked at her quietly. Xianyuan Swilling didn't seem to notice her gaze, and kept looking at Rong Yu, frowning and murmuring, he looks not much older than my eldest brother. Nan 11 knew that it was impossible for Rong Yu to answer this question, so she smiled lightly and said, 2 out of 20. I should be 23 after the new year. 22, Xianyuan Swilling smiled, my eldest brother is 19, 3 years older. Nan 11 coughed lightly, little princess. Did the Prince Regent ever have any concubines? Well. Nan 11's expression was subtle. Xianyuan Jia and Xianyuan Dan also froze at the same time. 3 pairs of eyes fell on Xianyuan Swilling's face with strange looks. The hall was eerily quiet for a moment. What's wrong? Xianyuan Swilling looked at Nan 11 strangely, then turned to look at the other two people, walked to a chair closer to Nan 11 and Rong Yu, and sat down, staring at them without blinking. Rong Yu, is there anything wrong with my question? The regent is a powerful member of the Zhou royal family. He has a distinguished status and has military power. There should be many wives and concubines in the palace. No, Nan 11 smiled faintly. Although she still didn't understand what the little princess was thinking, she still told the truth. Rong Yu is a person with single-minded feelings and doesn't have so many concubines. Xianyuan Swilling seemed a little unconvinced and turned to look at Nan 11 with obvious suspicion in her eyes. Nan 11 secretly sighed. Why is this little princess of the Huainan Wang family so obsessed with whether Rong Yu has a concubine? It might be said that it was a deliberate provocation, but it didn't seem like it. But it was not a provocation, and I really didn't hear any good intentions in such a topic. After pondering for a moment, she said calmly, speaking of the prince, what happened in the military camp just now was related to your eldest brother. Xianyuan Swilling picked up the teacup, lowered her head and took a sip of tea. What's wrong with my elder brother? He broke some rules and was punished with a military stick, Nan 11 said calmly. Right now, he is recuperating in the military barracks. You. Who dares to hit my eldest brother? Before Nan 11 could finish her words, Xianyuan Swilling's brows were raised and her expression changed suddenly. My eldest brother is the heir. Who dares to attack the heir? Nan 11 was silent for a moment, looking at her emotionlessly. Bang! The teacup was placed heavily on the table. Xianyuan Swilling raised her eyes and looked at Rong Yu. The regent ordered to beat my eldest brother. Nan 11 raised her eyebrows. Rong Yu's eyes were indifferent and he finally spoke. So what? You. Xianyuan Swilling stood up suddenly, tightly grasping the handkerchief in her hand. There was no trace of shyness in her almond eyes, only a ball of anger. You tyrant! What's the use of being good-looking? You are so cold and ruthless, just like a demon. You have a cold face all day long, as if someone owed you 8 million taels of silver and didn't pay it back. How could Princess Feng like you? You are a tyrant. Nan 11 saw that her face changed faster than turning a page, and she was so stunned that she forgot to react. God has mercy on her. This is the first time she has seen someone dare to point at Rong Yu's nose and scold him, and scold so powerful. She didn't even know whether to scold angrily or admire this girl's audacity. Xianyuan Jia and Xianyuan Dan were so scared that their faces turned pale and they dared not breathe. The two maids and palace maids serving in the hall were even more pale, and they almost knelt down to beg for mercy. The hall was quiet for a moment. Nan 11 frowned. This palace. Xianyuan Swilling didn't listen, snorted, turned around and left. Nan 11. Isn't she, the Princess Feng, too lacking in dignity? Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbspeed -01, container, tabula below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 306. Xianyuan Dan and Xianyuan Jia looked at Nan 11 and Rong Yu anxiously, feeling like they were sitting on pins and needles. Nan 11 took a sip of tea slowly and said calmly, I didn't expect the little princess of the Huainan king's family to have such a hot temper, which is completely different from her brother. I heard that the Huainan princess is quite fond of this little princess, and the Huainan king is a military commander, so he doesn't have too strict requirements for his daughter. Xianyuan Dan said, originally, the temperament of women from military commanders' families is somewhat unconventional, so. Unconventional. Nan 11 smiled lightly. This is too unconventional. Although she doesn't care much about the many rules in the palace, it doesn't mean that she can tolerate someone being so rude in front of her, and pointing at Rong Yu's nose and shouting. But she can understand it. She has been in the fiefdom for many years. Her father and brother are military generals. Their styles of doing things are completely different from those of the civil officials in the imperial capital. She has been influenced by them since she was a child. If her mother pampers her more, there will be no so-called 3 obediences and 4 virtues to teach her, and she will not be forced to be dignified and elegant. It is normal for her to be straightforward and unruly. Besides, she will not stay in the imperial capital for too long, so there is no need to care about her. Nan 11 turned her head to look at Rong Yu, and saw that his expression was normal, without any displeasure on his face. She smiled lightly for a while. Rong Yu, you have never been scolded by others since you grew up. Rong Yu glanced at her and stretched out his hand to pinch her face. Do you want to keep them for dinner? Nan 11 glanced at Xian Yuanjia and Xian Yuandan, and shook her head slowly. Some other day. Xian Yuandan and Xian Yuanjia stood up at the right time. The weather is cold now, and the princess is in a special condition. You need to rest more. We will leave first. Nan 11 hummed and said to Yin Yu said, give the gifts I prepared to the 2 young princesses. Xian Yuanjia's expression changed slightly, and she whispered, I dare not, I am just a concubine of Prince Jing's mansion, I dare not call you princess. Then you don't have to call yourself a slave. Nan 11 smiled lightly, I grew up in Dezhou, so I am not close to you. Otherwise, we are cousins, so there is no need to be too unfamiliar. Her words were well intentioned, and Xian Yuanjia and Xian Yuandan were moved by them, but they would not climb up the pole. Brothers born from the same mother have their own superiors and inferiors, let alone cousins like them. The superiority and inferiority of the monarch and the ministers are not the level they can cross without authorization. Yin Yu stuffed 2 brocade boxes into the 2 girls, they thanked them, and quickly left, leaving Rong Yu and Nan 11 alone in the hall. Madame Su breathed a sigh of relief without leaving a trace. She felt that it was easier to be nervous when there were outsiders. Although Princess Feng and the regent had only entered the East Palace for 2 days, she had served more than one master in the Deep Palace, and she could probably understand the temperament and habits of the regent and Princess Feng. When there were no outsiders, the regent and Princess Feng liked to be quiet. The palace servants did what they should do, and they didn't have to serve them. As long as they didn't disturb the 2 masters' peace, it would be fine. As long as they didn't delay meals and tea, washing and changing clothes, and did their duties well, and didn't do anything they shouldn't do, there would be no problem. She looked particularly easy to serve. Nan 11 had a gentle and tolerant temper, and was completely unlike the concubines in the harem who were so moody. However, no matter how gentle she was, the master was still the master, and soon she would become the king of a country above thousands of people. This unique and noble identity alone made people dare not take it lightly, not to mention that she had a regent who was called a tyrant by the Princess of Huainan. Madame Su led the people out, but did not dare to go too far. She led a few smart palace maids to wait at the palace gate, not to disturb the 2 masters, but to be able to hear the master's instructions in time. Nan 11 stood up and walked into the inner hall, sat down on the edge of the bed, and looked at Rong Yu, who followed her without blinking, with some thoughts in her eyes. What's wrong? Rong Yu bent down and kissed her forehead. His voice was low and mellow, like the best wine. What are you looking at? Look at how beautiful you are. Nan 11 smiled lightly, her eyebrows and eyes were stained with a layer of softness. Sure enough, you are invincible in the world. This sentence seemed to have magic, and the corners of the lips of the man who was cold and indifferent in front of outsiders could not help but rise, and the slight redness on his ears seemed like joy, but more like a bit of embarrassment. Nan 11's surprised expression was as if she had discovered a new world. Rong Yu, are you blushing? Rong Yu stretched out his hand and pressed her to his chest, and a voice came from above his head, "No." Yes. Nan 11 pulled his arm and raised her head, "Let me see." Rong Yu refused and pressed her to his chest. Nan 11's eyes were full of smiles, and the arc of the corners of her lips could not be concealed. "Rong Yu, you are so cute." "Cute?" Rong Yu lowered his eyes and looked at the top of her head. His body seemed to be drugged. Uncontrollable numbness spread throughout his limbs and bones, and the boiling feeling flowed in his blood. "Rong Yu, I like you more and more, I like you very much." Nan 11 put her arm around his waist and sighed softly. She was getting more and more used to expressing her true feelings. She felt that couples should not hesitate to say sweet words. "Thank you for your tolerance of me all the time, and thank you for your reckless persistence at the beginning, and thank you. 11 Rong Yu sat down beside her, put his arm around her waist, tilted his head and kissed her face. "Don't thank me, thanking me is meaningless, why not do something practical?" "Something practical?" Nan 11 was silent, turned her head and looked out the window. "Let's have a daytime orgy." Rong Yu laughed, "What my husband wants." Nan 11 stretched out her hand and twisted his waist. She stopped joking and asked seriously, "You weren't angry just now, were you?" "Angry?" Rong Yu held her in his arms and sniffed the fragrance of her hair. "What are you angry about?" "The daughter of the king of Waynan. She's just a spoiled little girl. Don't pay attention to her." Nan 11 looked up at him. "Are you really not angry?" Rong Yu sighed, hugged her and fell on the bed, leaning over to cover her delicate lips. "Don't ruin the atmosphere for an insignificant person." Nan 11 hummed, "Then tell me." "We'll talk later," Rong Yu said in a low voice. "Let's take a bath." Nan 11. "Take a bath together." Rong Yu raised his head, his deep eyes locked on her eyebrows. "It seems that there is nothing wrong with being promiscuous in the daytime. Anyway, there is nothing to do today, it's okay to be idle." Nan 11 was silent for a moment, and wanted to be reserved, but she really liked the feeling of being with Rong Yu. "It seems not good to say one thing and mean another," she muttered in a low voice. "Right." Rong Yu couldn't help laughing and picked her up from the bed. "Yes, the king of a country should be honest and can't say one thing and mean another." Nan 11 hugged his neck and walked to the back in his arms. She couldn't help clearing her throat. The king of a country should pay attention to his image and can't indulge in beauty. "Rong Yu, you will make me a tyrant." Warm Ti. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 307. "No," Rong Yu said in a low voice, "I promise that you will become the most sage empress in the history of dongling." Nan 11 buried her head in his arm and raised the corners of her lips slightly. "I was joking." She believed what he said. Rong Yu might still have something to hide, but no matter what he said, he was lying to her. Time flies by today. After being delayed for a while in the morning, she rubbed her ears and hair for a while after coming back. It was already past noon when Rong Yu ordered the food to be served. Nan 11's stomach growled with hunger, especially after experiencing a slightly strenuous exercise. "It was so good, I felt like I could eat a whole chicken." The palace maid's meticulous and precise meal exuded an alluring fragrance, which made her move her index finger. Rong Yu ordered her to specially prepare delicious and nutritious abalone soup for her, and personally served her every delicacy. Nan 11 ate happily and satisfied. Many women will vomit non-stop when they are pregnant. Except for my belly getting bigger day by day, I don't seem to have any special reaction. I can eat and sleep. Rong Yu's movements while eating were all filled with innate nobility, flowing smoothly and pleasing to the eye, because you are the destined emperor and you are blessed by the gods. Nan 11 had already eaten and drank enough, and now she was holding her chin, admiring the beautiful husband in front of her as she ate calmly and elegantly, her eyes full of love. "I heard that a virtuous and considerate wife will always cook and personally cook some delicious dishes for her husband," she said in a soft voice. "Should I cook some dishes for my dear husband to keep his stomach firm?" Rong Yu's voice was calm. If Her Majesty the Queen needs to cook in person, all the cooks in the imperial kitchen can be pushed out of the Meridian Gate and beheaded in public. Cruel Nan 11 pursed her lips and smiled. You still don't understand the charm. Rong Yu swallowed the food in his mouth, put down his chopstick slowly, picked up the teacup and took a sip gracefully. Then he slowly raised his eyes to look at Nan 11 and said, as a husband, I will learn to understand the style in the future. But never in a way that makes you wash your hands and make soup. Nan 11 raised her eyebrows and looked at him. Oh? In what way should it be done? Rong Yu pondered for a moment. Do you want to sleep for a while? Nan 11 was silent. Although I don't mind accompanying you to show off your prostitution during the day, it's not good to do it too often. A muffled laugh interrupted her words, and Nan 11's voice stopped abruptly. Her eyes fell on his noble and soft face. Why are you laughing? Because I'm happy, I'm smiling. Rong Yu put down the teacup, reached out to pick her up and walked to the inner hall. When I said take a nap, I just took a nap. I meant a nap. I'm not afraid that you will be tired. Are you ready? I want you to have a good rest. What's going on in your little head? Nan 11 was silent. Or is it that Her Majesty the Queen is actually looking forward to having sex with me during the day? Rong Yu's usually calm voice had a hint of bewitching. If this is the case, it is not impossible for my husband to be satisfied. Rong Yu, shut up. Nan 11's pretty face flushed. Don't talk nonsense. Rong Yu lowered his eyes and kissed her. I obey, Your Majesty the Queen. Nan 11 was silent. She found that Rong Yu seemed to have changed a little, and became, well, she became a little unable to resist. The sun is shining brightly outside the hall, and the spring scenery is beautiful inside the hall. In order to take care of his beloved concubine's delicate body, Rong Yu accompanied her to lie on the bed and take a nap. Have a good rest for 2 days. I will take you somewhere after the canonization ceremony. Nan 11 turned to look at him. Where? Rong Yu put his slender fingers against her lips and said in a soft voice, keep it secret first. No matter how much turmoil and speculation arose inside and outside the palace due to the beating of Prince Huainan, the East Palace was not affected at all. As the creator of this turmoil, Rong Yu had done what he had to do, leaving the rest to others to judge at will. I didn't even bother to pay attention to it. The two slept in the East Palace until darkness fell. To be precise, Nan 11 was sleeping soundly, and Rong Yu had been lying next to her, watching. Those deep eyes like stars and the sea contained unspeakable deep emotions, as well as some things that were well concealed during the day. Disturbed. As the night deepens, a waning moon hangs in the sky, dotted with only a few stars. Nan 11 opened her eyes and met a dignified and handsome face. She didn't speak for a moment, just looked at him quietly. Her dark and bright pupils were crystal clear, soft and calm, as tolerant as the vast sea. Everything in the world is more tolerant of the man in front of her who loves her with all his heart. Rong Yu, the corners of Nan 11's lips raised slightly, and a soft smile spread across her eyes, and Rong Yu bent down and kissed her eyelashes, saying in a gentle voice, and there is no desire or complicated thoughts at this moment, only the eyes of profound tenderness hidden close at hand, warm and clear, like water and ink, like a deep still night and a full moon in the sky. The canonization ceremony was held 2 days later in the Hall of Supreme Harmony. The long red carpet was rolled out from the palace gate to the throne of His Majesty Dan. Hundreds of civil and military officials entered through the palace gate. They were separated on the left and right sides of the red carpet. The atmosphere was strict and solemn. The chamberlain standing next to the dragon chair said in a high voice, "The Emperor has arrived." The personal steward carefully helped His Majesty the Emperor to the dragon chair and sat down. The young high priest, who was dressed in a white robe and was holy and unparalleled, followed the Emperor, walked to the dragon chair and stood quietly, holding a golden scepter in his hand, overlooking the ministers, and a clean and peaceful atmosphere unstained by dust poured out from his body. There was no trace of any emotion on the young and handsome face. Only the dark and clean eyes seemed to show compassion, which made people feel the ultimate tolerance and compassion, and involuntarily gave birth to a heart of respect and awe. The emperor sat down and all the officials bowed in obeisance. "Long live my emperor! Long live my emperor! Long live!" The chamberlain shouted, "Get up! Thank you, your majesty." The ministers stood up and stood in silence. The chamberlain announced loudly, "The ceremony for the canonization of the crown prince by Emperor Chongming of Dongling has begun." Nan 11, dressed in a crimson embroidered python robe, walked in from the palace gate, always accompanied by the noble and cold man. The two of them had outstanding looks and exuded an overwhelming nobility. As soon as they entered the palace, all the courtiers were attracted by it. Awe-inspiring, he held his breath involuntarily. Is this the regent of the great Zhou dynasty, Rong Yu, the world-famous battlefield warrior who defeated the northern Xinjiang cavalry? The minister, who had never met before, looked at Rong Yu in silence, secretly thinking that apart from this amazingly handsome appearance, this young-looking man's stern, restrained aura was what truly made people fearful. With such a regent in the great Zhou dynasty, it is no wonder that northern Xinjiang and Shu kingdom did not dare to invade. Everyone's eyes moved slightly, and when they fell on Nan 11's face, they were surprised again. Their future queen was very good-looking, with bright eyes and a beautiful face. Her brows were calm and soft, but she hid a pressure that could not be ignored. Based on this appearance alone, if she is a beloved concubine, she must also be a beloved concubine who will captivate the whole country. As a prince and future queen, she indeed has a grace and bearing that ordinary women don't have, which makes people unconsciously startled. No wonder the regent of the great Zhou dynasty regarded her as a jewel. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 308. Walking under His Majesty Dan, Nan 11 bowed and saluted. Before anyone could say anything, Rong Yu had spontaneously walked aside and stood 3 steps away from Nan 11. His figure was tall and thin, and his whole figure was like a sheathed sword. His sharp edge was restrained, but he could always feel it. Impressive majesty. Nan 11 raised her eyes slightly and once again saw the holy and flawless high priest in white robes. The high priest also saw her, with a somewhat unclear look in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was clean and elegant. "Princess Feng, please kneel down to accept the canonization." Nan 11 narrowed her eyes and was about to kneel down when Rong Yu said indifferently, "She can't kneel down." The hall was so quiet at this time that you could hear a pin drop. As soon as Rong Yu said these words, the whole hall was in an uproar. Everyone turned their heads in unison and their eyes fell on him. "She can't kneel," Rong Yu repeated coldly, looking at the high priest with calm and tough eyes, and his voice was even colder and indifferent, revealing an irrefutable coercion. "Give her the imperial decree of canonization and directly grant the treasure book, gold seal is sufficient." There was a lot of discussion in the palace. What does this mean? The appointment of a crown prince is a very serious matter. Is the regent of Great Zhou trying to disrupt the situation? Why can't you kneel? Princess Feng hasn't ascended the throne yet, why don't you kneel before the emperor? The world is so big that all the people must kneel down and worship the emperor. Just because Princess Feng is the prince chosen by the gods does not mean she is special, and she should not be arrogant because of her favor. Otherwise, where is the dignity of the royal family? Where is the majesty of the priest's palace? Rong Yu didn't speak. He turned a deaf ear to the roaring voices in his ears. His dignified and indifferent face seemed to be covered with a thin layer of frost. His dark eyes stared at the high priest standing next to the dragon chair without blinking. His eyes were full of color. Sharp and sharp. The high priest also looked at him silently without saying a word, his gentle face showing no emotion or anger. Nan 11 narrowed her eyes and stood quietly without saying a word, with no intention of trying to smooth things over. "This is to establish the crown prince," the high priest said calmly. His voice was gentle and calm. "According to etiquette, Princess Feng must kneel down and worship the emperor." Rong Yu's tone became more and more serious. "I told you, she can't kneel." "Prince Regent, don't go too far," King Wei said coldly and angrily. "This is Dongling, not your great Zhou dynasty hall, and this is not a place for you to mess around based on your status. The regent doesn't let Princess Feng kneel down. Is it because Princess Feng is pregnant?" someone among the courtiers said calmly, as if they were looking for a reasonable reason for him. "Please forgive me for my rude words. Princess Feng's belly is swollen. She should have passed the dangerous period of pregnancy. Kneeling at this time will not affect the safety of mother and child." As soon as these words came out, the other ministers all showed expressions of understanding, thinking that the regent was really because Princess Feng was pregnant. However, these words did not soften the regent's attitude. He still did not say a word and looked at the high priest in silence. His Majesty the Emperor, who was sitting on the dragon throne, frowned. Rather than being unhappy as the king of a country, he was more surprised by the regent's attitude. From the moment they met, he had clearly and resolutely stated Princess Feng's attitude that she was not allowed to kneel. However, today's registration ceremony was watched by all the officials. In such a solemn occasion, it is really puzzling that he still insists on it. If it is true that he is domineering and arrogant just because of his status, it is really not like that. The atmosphere in the hall was stagnant for a moment. The air was tense and filled with uneasy depression. If the high priest insists, then the ceremony of appointing the crown prince will be abandoned. Rong Yu's voice was calm and indifferent, without any room for change. He obviously did not care about the dissatisfaction of the Dongling Manchu dynasty civil and military officials. "She will not kneel to anyone." The high priest's hand holding the golden staff tightened slightly, and his eyes looked at Rong Yu with a bone-crushing coldness. However, his eyes had no lethality on Rong Yu, nor could they change his attitude. "Nan 11 will not kneel down." They all knew the reason for not kneeling. These people were not qualified to make her kneel down. No matter what the reason was, it was impossible. The hall fell into a long dead silence. None of the ministers who were aroused with anger dared to speak out at this time. They seemed to be sensitive to something. Their eyes moved between the regent and the high priest of the great Zhou dynasty, and they faintly smelled a cold and murderous atmosphere. The ministers were frightened by this. What's going on? Probably no one expected that such a turmoil would occur in a ceremony to establish the crown prince. It was not due to differences in positions or power, but just because of the etiquette that should be there. They really don't understand what can happen if they just kneel down. The atmosphere was tense. The regent said nothing, and neither did the high priest. His Majesty the Emperor frowned slightly and said calmly, "I think this matter should not be decided by the regent." As soon as these words were spoken, the courtiers bowed and saluted. "Your Majesty is wise." Zi Chen, the Emperor's gaze fell on Nan 11, "What do you think?" Nan 11 leaned forward slightly and said in a calm voice, "I listened to Rong Yu. The reason he interceded on the school field was because he saw Rong Yu's true thoughts. The focus of punishment was not the amount, but the fact that the purpose of establishing prestige had been achieved, and privately he was not willing to let his soldiers be seriously injured. Therefore, Nan 11's plea for mercy will not dissuade Rong Yu. But this time the situation is different. Rong Yu's attitude was very firm. She could even guess why he didn't want her to kneel. No matter how rebellious and arrogant such behavior was in the eyes of Dongling's civil and military officials, Nan 11 knew that she should stand on the same front with Rong Yu, unconditionally support him and trust him, even if it caused unnecessary speculation, dissatisfaction, and anger. The regent of the great Zhou dynasty was able to interfere with Princess Feng's actions today because of a courtesy that should have been there. When Princess Feng ascends the throne in the future, will she control the country of Dongling, or even directly usurp the throne? An old minister headed by the left said with a cold face. His tone was stern and tough. It shouldn't be the turn of an outsider to be here in the affairs of the Dongling royal family. Wrong, you is not an outsider, Nan 11 said lightly. He is my husband in the great Zhou dynasty. He was married to me through 3 letters and 6 engagements. He is also my consort in Dongling. If Dongling always treats him as an outsider, then I can only be an outsider. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 309. The expression of the veteran minister who spoke changed slightly. No matter what his status is, he should maintain the respect that a junior should have in front of the emperor, instead of, rather than relying on his status to think that he can be lawless and tyrannical on Dongling's territory. Nan 11 smiled casually. Everyone, please rest assured that Rong Yu does not have that much desire for power, and he will not do such things as seeking power and usurping the throne. I can guarantee here that if one day he really has a different intention, the palace is willing to commit suicide to thank the ancestors of Dongling. The whole palace was shocked. But as long as I'm here, I won't allow anyone to bully him, Nan 11 said in a calm tone. With a calm demeanor, I'm not kneeling today because I have a special body. I had tried to persuade her before, but Rong Yu disagreed, fearing that something might happen to me. In fact, ever since I learned that I was pregnant, Rong Yu had been staying by my side most of the time. His cautious attitude made me feel uncomfortable. The palace has no choice but to be cautious, and I hope that all the princes and lords can sympathize with his uneasiness. These words were spoken both softly and hard. She not only showed her attitude of protecting Rong Yu, but also expressed her apology in a timely manner. The woman's soft words can always save a bit of face for others. Moreover, the royal ministers present also understood in their hearts that this was Princess Feng's attempt to comfort both parties. Down the steps. If they insist on insisting, the situation will only continue to be stalemate. The regent of the Zhou dynasty seems to have no intention of compromising at all, and Princess Feng is the crown prince who must be established in Dongling. On this point alone, they are already at a disadvantage. If it were a previous enrollment ceremony, which prince would dare to have such an attitude? I'm afraid that Zhongli will be abolished on the spot, and he will be dragged out to beat him, or in serious cases, he will be sent to the sky prison. But after all, Princess Feng has a special status, and no one can defy the fate that comes once every 200 years. Besides, she is indeed pregnant again. Who dares to lay a finger on her? The ministers were silent and looked at each other. Xian Yuanyao, who was dragging his broken and sick body, muttered in a low voice, "If you don't want to kneel, don't kneel. Anyway, you will become the queen in a month. What's the point of worrying about whether to kneel or not? What Princess Feng is carrying in her belly may be, the future little emperor is so delicate." "Shut up," King Huainan turned his head and looked at his son coldly. "Do you have the right to speak here?" Xian Yuanyao, who was still a little pale and looked extremely weak, silently closed his mouth. When the ministers saw him, they couldn't help but think of what happened in the military camp 2 days ago. The wounds on the prince's body were caused by the regent Rong Yu's people. Didn't he have any resentment at all? Looking at the emperor's grandson who also came with a sick body, well, the former emperor's grandson Xian Yuanyan's face was also pale and haggard. Although his physical condition has improved in recent days, he was still facing the immediate situation in front of him. In the scene of Chu, there was no trace of happiness on his face at all. His expression was gloomy, and he obviously still couldn't let go of losing the throne. The ministers looked back and secretly said that the Wei family has not accepted the fact yet, but Princess Feng will ascend the throne in a month. If they still show obvious dissatisfaction at this time, Won't they worry about being resented in front of Her Majesty the Queen in the future? Grandson of the former emperor. For a person who was once very close to the throne, after the new emperor ascended the throne, it would be difficult to treat him equally with other royal relatives. However, King Wei showed no intention of restraining himself in his words and deeds. That's it. His Majesty the Emperor seemed to have lost his temper due to Rong Yu's successive rude actions, and said calmly, "High Priest, let's begin." The High Priest in a holy white robe narrowed his eyes and responded calmly, "I obey." After saying that, he picked up the imperial decree on the dragon table and read it out once with no expression. The civil and military officials in the court bowed their heads respectfully and listened. After the imperial edict was read out, the high priest personally held the golden seal and treasure book of the crown prince and walked down from the throne. When she arrived in front of Nan 11, she said calmly, "Princess Feng really obeys the regent's words." Nan 11 raised her eyes to look at him, and the curve of her lips was light and calm. "He is my husband." In March this year, did Princess Feng have a long dream? The high priest's elegant and melodious voice seemed to be a bit confusing. There were some painful scenes in the dream. High priest Rong Yu's cold voice sounded, and his voice seemed to be tempered with ice. "Please pay attention to your identity." The high priest glanced at him casually. "I am talking to Princess Feng. What is the regent worried about?" Nan 11's heart moved slightly, and her hands hanging under the sleeves of her wide robe clenched unconsciously. "What do you want to say?" "Princess Feng should remember that dream very vividly," the high priest said lightly. "Is it after that dream that Princess Feng woke up and decided to marry she?" Ji Chongyu and Rong Yu quickly walked to Nan 11, stretched out his hand and pulled her into his arms. He looked at the high priest with eyes as cold as winter. "If you say one more word, I will take her away immediately." It was so quiet in the main hall that you could hear a pin drop. The ministers looked up at the three people in the palace in shock, not understanding what was happening. What dream? What did the high priest want to say? What kind of dream made the regent of the Zhou dynasty so angry? Is it related to Princess Feng? Did the high priest calculate the fate related to Princess Feng? His Majesty the Emperor, who was sitting on the dragon throne, frowned tightly and faintly smelled an unusual aura. "High priest, what's going on?" Nan 11 was imprisoned in Rong Yu's arms and could not move. She could clearly feel Rong Yu's uneasiness at this time. The hand holding her shoulder was clenched very tightly, so hard that it made her shoulder blade hurt. However, what she cared about was not the pain, but the uncontrollable trembling on her shoulder. Rong Yu was out of control, afraid, and uneasy. Nan 11 pursed her red lips and did not speak for a while. She just looked at the two people confronting each other in silence. Dream. The dream that made her wake up and decide to marry Rong Yu after waking up. Nothing. The high priest turned around and bowed to the emperor to apologize. "I am rude, please forgive me." The emperor would certainly not blame him, but there was a little more thought in his eyes. The high priest turned back to face Nan 11 and handed the tray with the golden seal and the treasure book in his hand to Nan 11. "Princess Feng, please take the treasure book and the golden seal." His posture and tone returned to the previous calmness, as if the scene just now was an illusion. But Nan 11 knew that the words the high priest had just said must have revealed something very important. Because there was no sign, just because of the high priest's words, Rong Yu lost control in front of so many dongling officials, and did not hesitate to stop the high priest's words with threatening words. Window. Tabula equals window. Tabula. Tabula.push, mode, thumbs feed -01, container, tabula below article feed, placement, below article feed, target. Type, mix. The regent is a yandere who needs to be pampered. Author, Nan Huang. Chapter 310. Rong Yu reached out and took the jade plate, pursed his thin lips tightly, glanced at the high priest expressionlessly, put his arm around Nan 11's shoulders and turned around to walk out. All the civil and military ministers in the palace were silent, watching the scene blankly. The priest held the golden scepter in his hand and looked at Rongyu's tall and thin body quietly, with a sharp and cold luster in his eyes. The high priest will follow me to the Dajhan palace. His Majesty the Emperor raised his head and rubbed his brows. He glanced at the ministers in the palace and froze for a moment when his eyes fell on Xianyu and Yan. Yandere also comes for a moment. The others should disperse. The ministers then woke up from a dream, knelt down and said, "Long live the Emperor, long live the Emperor." Nan 11 walked outside the palace, followed by Yinyu and Yinshuang. Seeing their prince's pale face, his heart suddenly sank, and he couldn't help but glance at Nan 11, who was silent. "What's wrong? What happened when the crown prince was appointed? Why does my prince's face look so ugly? Having trouble setting up a reserve?" Still, the jade chariot stopped in front of the palace steps. Rongyu silently picked up Nan 11 and walked down the palace steps. His thin lips were pursed tightly and his face was stiff and pale. Until he put Nan 11 on the jade chariot, the palace servant lifted her up. In the sedan chair, he still didn't speak. He didn't even raise his eyes to look at Nan 11. Nan 11 leaned on the chariot sedan, tilting her head, watching him quietly all the way. There seemed to be an unprecedented silence lingering between the two of them. The secret hidden in the words that were stopped in time carried a kind of roaring, chilling air, sweeping everything, as if to desperately destroying the relationship and trust that the two of them had carefully maintained during this period. If you ask Nan 11 what she is thinking at this time, she doesn't have anything special in mind. Just a sentence suddenly came to mind. If it is not broken, it cannot be established. As the sedan chair walked all the way to the East Palace, no one spoke. The palace people following behind were obviously sensitive to the uneasy atmosphere of an impending storm. They all lowered their eyebrows and lowered their eyes, and even breathed as softly as possible. When they arrived at the East Palace, the sedan chair landed. Rongyu picked up Nan 11 and walked into Fenghua Palace without saying a word. Nan 11, who was nestled in his arms, could see those dull eyes when she raised her eyes. They were not as ordinary as outsiders. The indifference and alienation in front of her was not the tenderness and affection in front of her in the past, but a dead silence without focus. His handsome face was also pale and stiff. Putting her on the bed in the inner hall, Rongyu stood frozen like a puppet for a moment, and whispered, "You should rest for a while first. My shoulder hurts a bit." Nan 11 frowned and raised her hand to gently rub her right shoulder blade. "You pinched me just now." Rongyu's face turned pale, and he subconsciously wanted to stretch out his hand. "Let me see." "Rongyu, you lost control today." Nan 11 leaned on the bedside and looked up at him casually. "Did he reveal a secret you didn't want others to know?" Rongyu's movements froze, and he could no longer move his outstretched hand. "Or is it a secret that you don't want me to know?" Nan 11's lips raised slightly. "I was thinking about something just now while sitting on the chariot sedan. On the way to Dongling, I said that I seemed to be tied to a dream. We have an indissoluble bond. I also had a big dream at the Prince Regent's palace. I wanted to tell you the reason why I suddenly wanted to marry you, but you didn't want to listen and repeatedly emphasized that the dream was false." "Rongyu, can you tell me how the high priest knew about that dream?" Rongyu lowered his eyes and clenched the hands hanging on his sides unconsciously. "Do you know what I dreamed about?" Nan 11 then asked. "I once thought that dream was the life I had experienced personally, a short, stupid and miserable life. However, if it was a real experience, in the dream there are really too many things that cannot be explained. Now that I think about it, is there any unknown mystery hidden in this dream? For example, since her mother had such a noble status, why did she watch her seeking death but never rescued her or revealed her identity? Why did Fu Chen obviously stay in Dezhou, but allowed her to kill Rongyu, and died tragically with Rongyu without coming forward to explain everything? There are indeed many things in dreams that have never appeared in this life." At that time, She didn't know that Rongyu was still the master of Juxiao Pavilion, that her mother was the eldest princess of Dongling, that she had never met Yeching Cheng of Shu, or that envoys from northern Xinjiang and South Vietnam had come to Zhou dynasty. Of course, she didn't know that she was the so-called queen of 200 years of destiny. Not knowing anything, he just died. Nan 11 sighed softly, Rongyu, I want to hear the truth. Rongyu's face was completely white, almost whiter than the face of Xian Yuanyao who she saw just now, who was seriously injured and had not recovered, which made Nan 11 feel distressed. However, the heartache was suppressed in her heart, and she said calmly, I will only give you this chance. If you don't want to say it, you don't have to say it in the future. Rongyu's lips tightened, Nan 11 waited quietly and did not rush. Dream. Rongyu finally spoke, his voice hoarse and astringent, the dream is fake. Nan 11 raised her eyebrows, how did you do it? She doesn't believe that anyone can control dreams. People can kill people, create blinders, use poison to make people hallucinate, and they can also act, but the people and images that appear in dreams should not be something people can create at will. Rongyu stopped talking again. He looked extremely fragile. How could he still be half as cold and tough as usual? If you don't want to say it, forget it. Nan 11 lowered her eyes, her tone was unusually calm, I think the high priest seems to want to tell me something. I can ask him when I have time. He may know more than you. Rongyu's face suddenly changed, and he looked up at her in disbelief. Nan 11 raised her hand tiredly and rubbed her eyebrows. Just as she was about to bend down to take off her shoes, she saw the tall and straight man kneeling down before her, kneeling on one knee on the ground, lowering his eyes and holding her ankle, putting her foot on his knee, lowering his head and being silent for a moment, slowly taking off her shoes for her, and then he didn't get up again, but knelt stiffly for a long time, and then whispered, I didn't mean to lie to you, I just... The voice was hoarse, full of paleness and helplessness, I just really have no choice. Nan 11's heart ached. There's really no way. What a simple sentence, but it came from the mouth of this indestructible man, how unbelievable it is. If he could say there is really no other way, then he must have been forced into a desperate situation. Nan 11's heart twisted slightly, feeling both painful and sore, and she reached out to help him up from the ground. Rongyu, I don't blame you for deceiving me or hiding things from me, but as long as you keep these things in your heart, you will always feel a thorn piercing you, which will hurt you, scare you, and make you anxious day and night. In this case, why don't you just tell us everything and we can solve it together, okay? Window. Taboola equals window. Taboola. Taboola.push, mode, thumbspeed -01, container, Taboola below article thumbnail -300x250, placement, below article thumbnail -300x250, target. Type, mix.